Hello everyone, this is Ola. Welcome to the third part of the endocrine physiology, and here we will discuss the hypothalamus-pituitary-endocrine axis. There are three levels for our endocrine glands to work, or most of our endocrine glands to work. At the top, we have the hypothalamus. The hypothalamus controls the anterior pituitary gland that we call the master endocrine glands, and then the anterior pituitary gland controls other endocrine glands. So it's a hierarchy of three levels. The hypothalamus can either stimulate the anterior pituitary gland, which is going to further stimulate the other glands, or inhibit the pituitary gland to stop an action. For the hypothalamus, it has releasing hormones. So if you read or releasing, it comes from the hypothalamus. Let's look at the breast milk production. So from the hypothalamus, we have the PRH, prolactin releasing hormone. This goes down to the anterior pituitary and stimulates the anterior pituitary to produce prolactin. Prolactin goes down to the breast and stimulate the production of milk. But women do not lactate all the time. So most of their life, they do not lactate. So they need a prolactin inhibitory hormone. Otherwise, they will be lactating without a need. So from the hypothalamus, we have the PIH, prolactin inhibitory hormone, that also we call dopamine. This goes down to the anterior pituitary gland and it inhibits the anterior pituitary gland from producing prolactin. Let's go to the thyroid gland and thyroxine hormone. From the hypothalamus, we have TRH, thyroid releasing hormone. It goes down and stimulates the anterior pituitary gland so that it produces TSH, which is thyroid stimulating hormone. Then the thyroid stimulating hormone goes down to the thyroid gland and it stimulates the thyroid gland to produce thyroxine hormone, the hormone that increases our metabolism. How about the hormones from the adrenal cortex? They are cortisol, aldosterone, and some sex hormones of insignificant amount. From the hypothalamus, we have CRH, cortisol releasing hormone, that goes down to the anterior pituitary, stimulating the anterior pituitary to produce adrenocortico-stimulating hormone, or adrenocorticotrophic hormone. The T for trophic means stimulating. Adrenocortico, because this goes to the adrenal cortex. Trophic hormone, because it's going to stimulate the adrenal cortex to produce hormones. So the ACTH goes to the adrenal cortex, stimulating the adrenal cortex to produce cortisol and aldosterone. How about the gonadal hormones? Let's go to the growth hormone first. From the hypothalamus, we have growth hormone releasing hormone. It goes to the anterior pituitary gland, stimulating the anterior pituitary to produce the growth hormone. The growth hormone goes down to the liver. So the liver is stimulated to produce insulin-like growth factors, leading to growth. But we don't grow all the time. So we need the growth hormone mostly during childhood. And after that, we need to control the production of the growth hormone. That's why we have growth hormone, inhibitory hormone, that goes down to the anterior pituitary gland and inhibit the anterior pituitary gland from producing the growth hormone. How about the gonadal hormones, the follicle stimulating hormone or the LH luteinizing hormone? From the hypothalamus, we have the gonadal releasing hormone. The gonadal releasing hormone goes down to the anterior pituitary, stimulating the anterior pituitary to produce FSH, follicle stimulating hormone, and LH, luteinizing hormone. Both hormones go to the ovaries in females or the testes in male, stimulating the testicles to produce androgen, which is a testosterone, and in female, they stimulate the ovary to produce the estrogen and progesterone. Also, the FSH leads to production of sperms in males or ova eggs in females. So there is a negative feedback to control the production of hormones. So here the hypothalamus stimulates the anterior pituitary. The anterior pituitary stimulates a gland to produce a certain hormone. Suppose now you have an enough level of that hormone. You don't need more of that. So what will happen is that hormone will do a negative feedback at the level of the hypothalamus, so to decrease the releasing hormone from the hypothalamus, and at the level of the pituitary gland. This is called long loop feedback. There is another short loop negative feedback that comes from the anterior pituitary and inhibits the hypothalamus. Like suppose that you have increased the level of prolactin, and prolactin comes from the anterior pituitary. So from the anterior pituitary, the signal goes to inhibit the hypothalamus from producing the PRH, or the prolactin releasing hormone. Let's focus on the thyroid gland. Sometimes there are disorders in the hypothalamus pituitary gland system. Suppose that there is a problem in the thyroxine hormone and there is a low level of thyroxine. We call that hypothyroidism. What is the reason of that hypothyroidism? It can be due to an issue in the thyroid gland itself. So the thyroid gland is damaged and does not produce enough thyroid hormone. In this case, we call that primary problem. And it can be due to a problem in the pituitary gland. So the pituitary gland is not able to produce the thyroid stimulating hormone. That's why the thyroid gland is not stimulated and does not produce thyroxine. In this case, we call that secondary hypothyroidism. Maybe both thyroid and pituitary are fine, but the problem is at the level of the president hypothalamus. It does not produce enough TRH, or thyroid releasing hormone, so that the anterior pituitary doesn't produce TSH because it's not stimulated by TRH, so that the thyroid doesn't produce enough thyroxine because there is no stimulation from the TSH. We call this tertiary hypothyroidism. Sometimes when the issue is from the pituitary or the hypothalamus, we call both secondary problems. So the secondary problem can be due to an issue of the pituitary gland or hypothalamus. The primary problem is always due to a problem in the gland itself. Let's look at the hormonal levels in different reasons of hypothyroidism. In the first scenario here, the issue is in the thyroid gland. So the thyroid gland does not produce enough thyroxine, meaning this is a primary hypothyroidism. What happens at the level of TRH from the hypothalamus or TSH from the pituitary gland? Always above the level of the problem takes the opposite direction due to the negative feedback. So what will happen is increased TRH and increased TSH. They are trying to stimulate the lazy thyroid, but it does not respond because it is damaged. In the second scenario, there is a problem in the pituitary gland. So the TSH from the pituitary gland is at a lower level. What will happen to the thyroid gland? Always down to the problem takes the same direction because the pituitary stimulates the thyroid gland. If the pituitary cannot stimulate the thyroid gland, then the thyroid will not work. So what will happen is decreased thyroxine. How about above the level of the problem? It always takes opposite direction. So the TRH increase from the hypothalamus try to push the lazy pituitary gland, but it does not respond because it is a failing gland. On the third scenario, the problem is at the level of the president hypothalamus. There is low level of TRH. If the president reduces a low level of a hormone, anything down will take the same direction. So TSH is going to be decreasing as well as the thyroxine, and this is tertiary hypothyroidism, or we call sometimes the pituitary gland problems or hypothalamus, both we call them secondary. So here it is secondary of pituitary origin, and here it is secondary of hypothalamus origin. Let's look at hyperthyroidism problems. In the first scenario, now the thyroid gland is crazy. It's not lazy, it's actually crazy, producing high levels of thyroxine. This is primary hyperthyroidism because the thyroid gland is at increased level and the issue is in the gland, so primary. What will happen in the levels above the thyroid gland to the hypothalamic TRH and to the pituitary TSH? Of course, they take opposite, so they both decrease, trying to calm down the crazy thyroid, but it's crazy, it does not respond. In the second scenario, maybe there is a pituitary gland tumor producing high level of thyroid stimulating hormone. What will happen to the thyroid gland? It's going to be stimulated and thyroxine increases. How about at the upper level? Upper level takes opposite direction, so TRH goes down, and this is secondary hyperthyroidism due to a pituitary gland issue. The third case has the problem is in the hypothalamus. So the president now is crazy, producing high level of TRH, thyroid releasing hormone. What will happen down? Down to the problem takes the same direction. So the crazy amount of TRH stimulates pituitary so that the TSH increases, and then the TSH stimulates the thyroid so that thyroxine increases. We call this secondary hyperthyroidism due to hypothalamus issue or tertiary hyperthyroidism. Let's go with some review questions. What stimulates the release of growth hormone? The growth hormone comes from the pituitary gland. So the hypothalamus stimulates that production of growth hormone by producing growth hormone, releasing hormone. How about the hormone from the hypothalamus that inhibits the release of growth hormone? It is growth hormone, inhibitory hormone that we call also somatostatin. What stimulates production of thyroid stimulating hormone? Thyroid stimulating hormone comes from the pituitary gland. So we need something from the hypothalamus to stimulate the pituitary gland, and this is thyroid releasing hormone. What stimulates the production of the adrenocorticotropic or tropic hormone, ACTH? This comes from the pituitary gland, so the hypothalamic cortisol releasing hormone stimulates the anterior pituitary to produce ACTH. That goes down to stimulate the adrenal cortex to produce cortisol. What stimulates the production of the sex hormones, luteinizing and follicle stimulating hormones? We have the gonadal hormone releasing hormone, gonadal releasing hormone, and the gonadal releasing hormone stimulates the production of the follicle stimulating hormone as well as the luteinizing hormone. What hormone decreases the production of prolactin? We need most of our lifetime because the woman is not lactating in her in her life every day, so it needs that for a short period of time after delivery. So here we need a hormone from the hypothalamus to inhibit prolactin so that it does not produce breast milk when it's not necessary. So here we have prolactin inhibitory hormone that we call dopamine. During lactation, the hypothalamus produces the prolactin releasing hormone to stimulate the prolactin production from the pituitary to stimulate breast milk production. What hormone stimulates milk production? From the mammary gland. So what goes to the mammary gland is the hormone that comes from the pituitary gland. It's directly stimulating the breast, and that is prolactin. Target organs regulate the pituitary through feedback loops. Most often, this takes the form of course, negative feedback. Those questions are related to part 2. Lipid-soluble hormones, which bind to nuclear receptors, produce faster or slower response than water-soluble hormones that stimulate secondary messenger systems. They produce a slower response. Why? Because their action is to build proteins, and stimulation of protein synthesis takes a longer time. The lipid non-soluble ones that have receptors on the cell membrane work through stimulating secondary messengers and work through activation of enzymes. And this does not need a long time like the protein synthesis process. In the blood, can lipid-soluble hormone be free? No. They must be carried with a protein carrier.